Hello, I'm James Moha and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. Washington rejects Iran's latest proposal as Tehran accuses the US of piracy. Summer travel is looking to be impacted as airlines continue to feel the pinch over high fuel costs. And in the latest round of sanctions over the war in Ukraine, the EU targets Kyrgyzstan. Iran is signaling a tougher stance with the United States, saying it will expand its military strength and deepen defense ties with other nations. Meanwhile, Washington has rejected Tehran's latest proposal and is preparing tougher economic pressure, keeping tensions high between the two countries. Here's more.
Iran says the United States can no longer dictate its policies and should abandon what it calls illegal demands. According to Tasnim news agency, a defense ministry spokesperson said Tehran will keep strengthening its military and is ready to share its defensive capabilities with other nations. This comes as US President Donald Trump has rejected Iran's latest proposal to end the conflict, expressing frustration that Tehran wants to delay talks on its nuclear program. According to a US official, Iran suggested setting aside nuclear talks until after the war ends and shipping disputes are resolved. However, Trump insists nuclear issues must be addressed immediately. In a post on Truth Social, he claimed Iran told Washington it is in a state of collapse and is trying to stabilize its leadership while urging the reopening of the Hormuz Strait. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal reports Trump has directed aides to prepare for a prolonged blockade of Iran. The strategy focuses on tightening pressure on Iran's economy and restricting oil exports by limiting shipping access to its ports. Officials say Trump sees this as less risky than renewed military strikes or disengagement. At the same time, the US government has imposed sanctions on 35 entities and individuals linked to Iran's shadow banking network. Authorities accuse them of moving tens of billions of dollars to bypass sanctions and support activities Washington labels as terrorism. In the Arabian Sea, United States Central Command said US Marines boarded a commercial vessel, the MV Blue Star 3. However, they later released it after confirming it was not heading to an Iranian port. Despite an April 8th ceasefire, Iran says it remains on a wartime footing. According to official statements, Iran continues to update targets, train forces, and produce new equipment, citing deep mistrust of the United States. Beyond the region, the Panama Canal Authority says the conflict is already shifting global trade routes, with increased traffic expected to continue until tensions in the Middle East ease.
Meanwhile, Iran has sent a letter to the United Nations accusing the US of piracy for its seizure of Iranian tankers. Our correspondent Turaj Shiralilu has more from Tehran.
Iran's ambassador to the United Nations, Amir Saidi Ravani, in a letter to the Secretary General and the President of Security Council, stressed Tehran's every right to counter what he branded as the US's brazen act of state-sponsored piracy. The letter, available on the Iranian mission's website, referred to a recent confiscation order of 2 tankers by a US attorney, which the Iranian envoy said constitutes an explicit and deliberate admission of an internationally wrongful conduct. Iravani said that the US bears full and undeniable international responsibility for all consequences arising from these unlawful actions. Meantime, Army spokesman Brigadier General Mohammad Akraminia said on Tuesday that Tehran's armed forces are on war footing despite the ceasefire. According to the state-owned IRNA news agency, he warned that Iran has updated the enemy's target bank in the event of a renewed aggression. In another development, the Minister of Information and Communication Technology, Sattar Hashemi, urged the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, to condemn bombing of Iran's ICT infrastructure in the Israeli-US attacks. He made this statement in a telephone call with Bosan Tijani, the chairman of the ITU Council 2026, during which he called for raising the issue of deliberate targeting of Iran's civilian facilities at the ITU Council's ongoing meeting in Geneva. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, for A News.
A major shift in the global energy order is taking shape. The United Arab Emirates is leaving OPEC and OPEC Plus, opening a new chapter in Gulf oil politics. This comes at a time of regional disruption and global competition over market share and influence.
The United Arab Emirates says it will leave OPEC and OPEC Plus on May 1st, in one of the biggest recent departures from the oil producers alliance. The country's energy minister said the decision was made after a review of the UAE's current and future production strategy and was not discussed with any other government. The move comes as Gulf oil exports face major disruptions linked to the Iran conflict. Producers have struggled to ship supplies through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important routes for crude oil and liquefied natural gas. That means the UAE's exit may have limited immediate market impact, but it could carry greater weight once Gulf exports normalize. The decision also fits into Abu Dhabi's longer-term push to expand its energy capacity and act with more independence.
The UAE has been expanding its oil production capacity significantly in recent years. We have saw that they are manufacturing new plants, new refinery, so they are expanding their capabilities. Well, it may want greater freedom to produce and export without strict OPEC quotas, because OPEC has a very strict quotas regarding the oil exports. So that's why UAE considered this act, and this would also allow it to maximize revenue as well as to strengthen its market position. It also aligns with its broader goal of pursuing an independent economic and foreign policy.
For OPEC, the departure removes a major Gulf producer with spare capacity at a time when the group is already under pressure from lower market share and rival suppliers. The move is also being closely watched by other members of the OPEC Plus alliance. Russia says that while it respects the UAE's decision, it wants the alliance to remain intact.
It is a sovereign decision by the United Arab Emirates. We treat this with respect. We welcome statements from Abu Dhabi that the Emirates will continue to take a responsible stance in energy markets and pursue bilateral coordination. Given our very constructive and friendly relations with Abu Dhabi, we of course count that highly productive, constructive and effective contacts with the United Arab Emirates will continue.
When asked if OPEC Plus would continue functioning, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said it was important for the alliance to keep going.
This is a very important area of work, especially under current conditions when energy markets are, to put it mildly, turbulent. This format, OPEC Plus, makes it possible to significantly reduce such volatility in energy markets and helps to stabilize them.
The move by the UAE could deepen the rift with Saudi Arabia. Abu Dhabi has increasingly pursued its own path across the Middle East and Africa, while strengthening ties with the United States and Israel.
Still on the energy markets, global tensions are now having a ripple effect that is putting economic pressure on some of the world's most fragile states. In Yemen, it's adding another layer of strain to an already struggling country. Here's more.
Yemen has been embroiled in conflict for years, and the effects of the US-Israel conflict in Iran are making the fragile economy even worse. Rising global energy prices, disrupted shipping routes, and higher transport costs are feeding straight into the country, which relies heavily on imports of fuel and food. As a result, prices for basic goods are climbing again, and it's putting more pressure on families already struggling with poverty and instability.
Since the outbreak of the war, fuel and food prices in Yemen have risen, and transportation costs have increased as well. Meanwhile, due to a rise in marine insurance premiums by international insurers, driven by heightened risks at sea, shipping and insurance costs have also gone up. Overall, the Yemeni economy itself has been in an extremely fragile state.
Experts say the situation is especially severe in Yemen because its economy is so weak and dependent on imported supplies.
The war in Iran would directly affect the entire world and have a particularly severe impact on Yemen. The Yemeni government has already recognized this dangerous signal and has taken a series of measures to ensure the sustainability of its fuel supply and maintain the continued operation of air transport.
While authorities in Yemen are still trying to stabilize conditions, the country remains stretched to its limits, and even faraway wars are making everyday survival even harder.
Now, pressures are escalating in southern Lebanon during the fragile ceasefire. Israel says it destroyed a major Hezbollah tunnel, adding it is intensifying operations, while Lebanon reports 5 killed in recent attacks.
2 Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon have killed 5 people on Tuesday, including 3 rescuers who were hit while responding to the initial attack, according to officials. The second strike in Majd al-Zoun trapped the rescue workers under rubble. 2 Lebanese soldiers were also wounded. Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam condemned the strikes as a new and blatant war crime committed by Israel. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel has destroyed what he called a massive Hezbollah terrorist tunnel as fighting continues despite a US-brokered ceasefire. Explosions and plumes of smoke were seen across the region, while evacuation warnings were issued to residents in several towns.
Today we blew up a massive Hezbollah terrorist tunnel. We are destroying their terrorist infrastructure, we are killing scores of terrorists, and we are not done yet. We are operating within the security zone south of the Litani, north of the Litani, in the Bekaa Valley, and in northern Lebanon. A few weeks ago I gave a directive for a special project to eliminate the drone threat. It will take time, but we will blow that up too.
Despite the pause, clashes continue, with Israel carrying out strikes and Hezbollah launching drones and rockets. According to the Lebanese Health Ministry, more than 2,500 people have been killed since early March, highlighting the fragility of the ceasefire.
Staying on the conflict, Russia and Ukraine have reported new drone attacks, with an oil refinery hit on the Black Sea and residential areas damaged in Kiev. Both sides continue to target sites far from the front line.
Thick black smoke rose over the Tuapse oil refinery after a Ukrainian drone strike triggered a major fire at the Black Sea facility. Local officials said the refinery had been hit for the 3rd time this month, with residents from nearby streets ordered to evacuate. More than 160 firefighters were deployed, as emergency crews worked in what regional authorities described as extremely difficult conditions. Officials said no casualties were reported, but residents were urged to stay indoors, keep windows closed, and limit time outside because of smoke in the air. Earlier strikes on the same refinery caused an oil spill in the Black Sea, while residents reported black rain and an oily residue across parts of the city. The Kremlin accused Kiev of targeting oil facilities used for export operations and warned that such strikes risk further destabilizing global energy markets. Russian President Vladimir Putin said attacks on energy facilities were becoming more frequent and could have serious environmental consequences.
Drone strikes against civilian infrastructure are becoming more frequent. The latest example involves strikes on energy facilities in Tuapse, which could potentially lead to serious environmental consequences. However, the governor has reported that he is on the scene, or at least was there a couple of hours ago, and it appears there are no serious threats. People are dealing with the challenges they face on the ground.
Ukraine's military confirmed the strike, saying the refinery was part of Russia's military and economic potential. As Kiev expands attacks on energy sites, it says support Moscow's campaign. Meanwhile, Ukraine said Russian drones struck Kiev in daylight, injuring 2 people and damaging residential areas.
European airlines are facing their biggest challenge since the COVID-19 pandemic, with the Iran conflict driving up jet fuel prices and disrupting supplies ahead of the summer season. The International Air Transport Association has warned that fuel shortages and possible rationing could hit Europe and Asia if the situation continues. The International Energy Agency said Europe's reserves are already running low. Airlines like Lufthansa, KLM and Virgin Atlantic have begun cutting routes and raising ticket prices. Disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz and longer flight paths are adding to the fuel demand. Analysts say recovery could take months. Now, China is opening its markets to Africa, planning to scrap tariffs on imports from all countries with diplomatic ties. The move aims to boost exports and deepen economic links. A-News correspondent Manu Makdam has the details.
China has announced it will extend zero tariff treatment to all African countries with which it maintains diplomatic relations, a move aimed at deepening trade ties and expanding its economic footprint across the continent. The policy is expected to cover all 53 African states that have formal diplomatic relations with China, effectively removing tariffs on a wide range of exports from Africa into the Chinese market. The decision builds on earlier preferential arrangements and signals further upgrade of economic cooperation under the China-Africa framework, including long-standing development and trade initiatives. Officials describe the measure as a way to boost African exports, especially in agriculture, minerals, and manufactured goods, while also addressing trade imbalance concerns. Analysts note that while China remains Africa's largest trading partner, the actual benefits will depend on how easily African producers can meet Chinese import standards and scale up export capacity. The announcement also comes during efforts by Beijing to strengthen ties with developing regions and reinforce its role in South-South cooperation, positioning trade liberalization as a key pillar of its foreign economic policy. Manu Maktoum, A-News, Beijing.
Now, after the break, we'll discuss King Charles's visit to New York and whether royal diplomacy can ease tensions in a complicated UK-US relationship. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A-News. King Charles III is in New York as part of his US state visit, combining symbolic engagements with quiet diplomacy at a time of political and security strain. To help us discuss this latest development, we're joined now by Diogo Castro Silva, political analyst joining us from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Hi there.
Now, today's visit to Ground Zero precedes the 25th anniversary of the attacks. How does the King's presence there reinforce the UK's role as America's primary security partner?
Well, it's a reminder that, for example, the only time the Article 5 of NATO that provides common security and defense for all was actually used by the European partners of the US, not only the UK, just after the 9/11, and it seems something from another era in a certain sense, because it's only 25 years ago, but it looks like much longer, given where we are today in terms of the relations between the two continents and between UK and the US.
Now, 2 Jewish men were stabbed in London today in a suspected anti-Semitic attack linked to Iranian proxies. How does this domestic violence affect the King's ability to project a message of Western stability while on his US tour?
Well, unfortunately, anti-Semitic attacks have been happening in both sides of the Atlantic. A few years ago, you had a very horrendous killing in the U.S. In a U.S. synagogue. It was not New York, was another area of the U.S. But unfortunately, you are having these anti-Semitic attacks both in the US and the UK. I don't think it changes much in terms of the visit of the King. It's a sad occurrence and something that, like I said, has been happening, but I don't see it impacting hugely the visit of the King. Also, it's important to note that in some recent events of desecration of cemeteries, of Jewish cemeteries in France, for example, you had the hand of the Russian intelligence, as at the time was proven in the French court. So the picture is much more complex than just inter-community violence, if you want. and this is something that the authorities for sure have to investigate and act upon. But like I said, I don't see that event particularly having a huge impact on the visit of the king.
Now, the king is appearing with Mayor of New York, Mamdani, a known critic of the monarchy. Does this joint engagement signal a more pragmatic, modern approach or royal diplomacy?
Well, I do think, and that was a little bit of the irony yesterday when the King Charles was at the White House and with President Trump, that President Trump looks more our medieval notion of a king than actually King Charles. The monarchy in the UK today has a long history of constitutional monarchy, and today really the king is very alike, more symbolic of course because it's a monarch, but very alike of the traditional view of a head of state in a parliamentary system. So I don't think it represents already Queen Elizabeth had that posture and that approach, and I think King Charles just continues it. So I don't think it shows any evolution other than showing how modern in a sense and how contemporary to the principles of a constitutional monarchy is the UK monarch.
Now, speaking about evolution, as you rightly mentioned, yesterday the king became only the second British monarch to address a joint meeting of Congress. Was the warm reception a sign of policy alignment between the two nations, or simply respect for the crown?
No, I don't. I think you have to look this into the political scene of the USA. Like I said before, today President Trump has a view of the presidency more like an absolutist king, where interests of the US are viewed by the sole prism of the person exercising the power of the presidency, in this case, President Trump. And when you have that, and you have this, the professional state bureaucracy is being subsumed with the wishes of the president, which is a very strange evolution in the U.S. system, given the story of the U.S. Republic in terms of making the power of the power more impersonal than personal. And when you have that, you start to have a divergence between the interests of the nation itself and the interests of the president and its political power. And you are seeing that very clearly in the US. Now, Congress still functions in a way, most of the Congress still works in the old system of national interest and impersonal bureaucracy, if you want. So the King's speech has a very warm reception because, of course, in a way, some fundamental interests of the U.S. security are 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 linked to Europe and with the relationship with the UK. Unfortunately, that's not the view today of the administration because other incentives are at play. And that is one of the reasons you see this increasing divorce between Europe and the US, and more in this case, more particularly between the UK and the US. I don't think the visit of the king will arrest that process, which is going on. But the fact that the Congress found it, the arguments of the king and the speech of the king very very relatable, are in a sense the sign how dysfunctional at this stage the US political system is working, namely on the questions of national security.
Now, I want to take you back to what you said about wishes of the president or interest of the president. President Trump suggested the king supports his hardline stance on Iran. How damaging is it for the king's neutrality when a president claims his private backing on military issues?
Well, then you have to question whether that was actually true. First of all, the king works in a very narrow band of personal diplomacy. And that is why the speeches of the king are vetted by the government of the UK. He needs authorization to travel abroad by the government of UK. So the narrow band of what the king can do is very narrow. So the first question one has to ask is, how real was that alignment? Given all the previous positions of the king and its view on armed conflict, I do have some doubts if that support was so wholehearted as President Trump claims. And in fact, the position of the UK is not really that the conflict was welcome. There is a view in Europe and in the UK, this is a war of choice of the US and Israel. So it really, I think one has to look at those comments with a pinch of salt, really.
Now, thank you very much, sir, for sharing your time and insights with us.
Thank you.
All right, now after the break, we'll take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Azerbaijan is considering ending all interaction with the European Parliament, according to a source cited by local news agency Trend. Contacts had already been effectively suspended, but discussions are now underway about a complete break. The move follows rising tensions over a European Parliament resolution that supports democratic resilience in Armenia. Parliament is set to vote on Friday. Reports indicate that the document includes what they describe as unfounded accusations and demands directed at Baku.
Relations between the EU and Armenia have been marked.
Baku's historic old city is preparing for the International Carpet Festival 2026, marking a decade of global missions. Running from May 1st to the 3rd, the event will feature international pavilions and master classes across the capital's Asian streets to showcase the rich heritage of the craft. A News sat down with Chairman Emin Mamadov for an exclusive in-depth look at this evolution. The conversation will bring you in full at the upcoming special program. For now, here's a preview of the festival's packed agenda.
We have upcoming festival. What we do, we have a first day of forum where we have international speakers, and the theme is also exactly what we are talking about to you today. It's about exchange of how we're making traditional carpet weaving living today. And we have speakers from Turkey, from Nepal, from Uzbekistan, from Morocco and different other countries. So first day is a forum. In the evening, all the galleries located in Old Town will open the exhibitions. And of course, Old Town on Saturday and Sunday on May 2nd and 3rd will be covered with the carpets with many events. We will have different programs for the children, for adults. We're inviting all of you Saturday and Sunday to Ichari Shahar and live experience of the carpet. Be part of our festival and enjoy weekend with us.
The United Nations says Afghanistan-Pakistan hostilities continue along border areas, with the latest escalation causing casualties and damage in Kunar province. Afghanistan's foreign ministry has summoned Pakistan's ambassador, while the foreign minister also discussed the situation with the UK special envoy. Tamim Bahis has more.
According to OCHA's latest situation update, the level of fighting between Afghanistan and Pakistan is now lower than it was in March. But hostilities are still continuing, mainly in border provinces. OCHA says that between the 19th and the 21st of April, mortar rounds were fired into Afghan territory, damaging a school, a health facility, and a telecommunication pylon in the Dangam district of Kunar province. But the situation escalated again on the 27th of April, when mortar shelling and airstrikes hit Asadabad city, as well as Sarkane and Marawara districts of Kunar. According to officials at Asadabad hospital, at least 7 people were killed and 79 others were injured, including women and children. Meanwhile, Afghanistan's foreign ministry summoned Pakistan's ambassador in Kabul and handed over a protest note condemning what it called a violation of Afghan airspace and attacks on civilians and public facilities in Kunar. At the same time, Afghanistan's foreign minister met with the UK Special Envoy for Afghanistan, discussing the recent Afghanistan-Pakistan situation, Doha meetings and other issues. The UK envoy expressed sympathy with victims of the recent attacks and pledged continued humanitarian assistance and further engagement with Afghanistan. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, iNews.
The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says civilian harm is rising as clashes between Pakistan and Afghanistan escalate. Kabul accuses Islamabad of cross-border strikes that killed 7. Islamabad, however, denies the claim. The UN warns of a deepening humanitarian crisis. Hira Mustafa has more.
In response to the escalation, Afghan authorities summoned Pakistan's charge d'affaires in Kabul, formally protesting what they describe as cross-border strikes by Pakistani forces on civilian areas and public infrastructure. The Taliban administration says Pakistani forces fired mortars and rockets into populated areas, including a university in the Kunar province, claiming dozens of civilians were wounded, including women and children. It has strongly condemned the strikes, calling them a violation of Afghanistan's sovereignty and international law. Pakistan has rejected these allegations, calling them a blatant lie. Officials in Islamabad insist Afghanistan continues to provide safe havens to militant groups responsible for attacks inside Pakistan. Pakistan's Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi has also condemned what he described as unprovoked aggression from the Afghan side, while praising the military's response to security threats along the border. Kabul denies these claims and accuses Pakistan of failing to manage its own internal security challenges. The latest escalation has drawn concern from international humanitarian organizations, including the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan and OCHA, both of which have stressed that civilians and civilian infrastructure must be protected at all times under international humanitarian law. The renewed hostilities come despite recent diplomatic engagement. Earlier this month, Pakistan, China and Afghanistan held talks in Urumqi aimed at de-escalating tensions and improving coordination along the shared border. Islamabad and Kabul had agreed to a temporary ceasefire over Eid in March, following appeals from Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Turkey to reduce tensions. However, Pakistan's military says it will continue targeted operations against what it describes as militant groups operating from Afghan territory until, as it states, safe havens across the border are fully dismantled. Hira Mustafa for iNews, Islamabad.
Officials and leaders from across Central and Eastern Europe are meeting in Croatia. They're holding a key summit on energy, infrastructure and regional connectivity. Here's more.
The Three Seas Initiative Summit is now underway in the Croatian city of Dubrovnik, bringing together leaders from across Central and Eastern Europe and several strategic partners. The two-day event, which kicked off Tuesday, is aimed at enhancing cooperation among countries located between the Baltic, Adriatic, and Black Seas. Launched in 2016, the Three Seas Initiative seeks to bolster north-south connectivity in areas such as transport, energy infrastructure, and digital networks. The summit comes amid stepped-up efforts to diversify energy supplies and reduce reliance on traditional routes. On Tuesday, U.S. firms signed a raft of major deals with Balkan countries taking part in the summit, expanding Washington's regional energy footprint and supporting artificial intelligence development. Speaking at the summit, U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright said the agreements, collectively worth billions of dollars, reflect what he described as a new era of cooperation with Central and Eastern Europe. Officials say the raft of agreements is expected to strengthen energy security and accelerate regional infrastructure development. The United States is taking part in the Three Seas Summit as a strategic partner, along with Turkey, Germany, Japan, and Spain. On Tuesday, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan met Borjana Cristo, head of the Council of Ministers of Bosnia and Herzegovina, as part of a series of bilateral meetings held on the summit's sidelines. Analysts say the summit could play a key role in shaping future energy corridors and supply chains across the region. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Now, young voices are stepping into the global climate conversation as the Youth Forum on UN Global Goals 2026 opens in Istanbul for the first time. With COP31 high on the agenda, the forum is focusing on how the next generation can help shape climate policy, cooperation and sustainable development. Nurai Mustafa has more from Istanbul.
The Youth Forum on UN Global Goals 2026 is being held for the first time in Istanbul, bringing together young people from around the world to engage in important discussions on sustainable development, leadership and global cooperation. This year, the main focus of the forum is directed towards the COP31 climate change agenda, with discussions centered on joint approaches to addressing climate-related challenges. Within the COP31 framework, the key objectives include reducing national carbon emissions, strengthening climate adaptation strategies, and ensuring the active participation of young people in these processes. The choice of Istanbul as the host city is of particular significance. Istanbul has historically served as a bridge between Europe and Asia, making it a strategic hub for international cooperation and dialogue. Hosting discussions on a global issue such as climate change in this setting further enhances the exchange of ideas among young participants from different regions and supports the development of shared solutions.
United Nations must do something to implement its charter, which is the base of the United Nations. So, without implementing the UN Charter, United Nations cannot achieve these goals, and it will not be good to make a false promise, incorrect promise to the youth.
Reformulating the framework. The first panel session of the day, titled Leadership and Global Cooperation, Advancing the Sustainable Development Goals, a Road to COP31, brought together experienced leaders and young delegates to discuss climate diplomacy, international partnerships and progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. This was followed by the workshop Youth as Peacemakers, where participation received training aimed at developing skills in conflict resolution and mediation. In the afternoon, the panel discussion Policy and Innovation, Effective Strategies for CDG Implementation explored innovative approaches and accountability mechanisms for achieving the CDGs with contributions from both experts and young participation. Overall, the forum seeks to empower young people to take a more active role in international cooperation and to contribute innovative solutions to pressing global challenges. Nuray Mustafa Vashajiyev for A News, Istanbul, Turkey.
The European Union is expanding its sanctions pressure amid the war in Ukraine. In its latest package, financial institutions and companies in Kyrgyzstan have been targeted for the first time, with Brussels designating the country as a jurisdiction with a higher risk of sanctions circumvention. Bishkek, however, strongly rejects that assessment. Our correspondent has more from Almaty.
The inclusion of Kyrgyz companies and banks in the European Union's 20th package of sanctions against Russia has triggered a sharp response from Bishkek. The country's Ministry of Foreign Affairs says it's puzzled by the decision, stressing that Kyrgyzstan's position has effectively been ignored despite ongoing dialogue with Brussels. Officials say the Kyrgyz side has consistently provided European partners with all requested documentation and detailed information on measures taken to address sanctions-related risks. However, according to the Foreign Ministry, this did not influence the final outcome, under which several Kyrgyz entities were effectively accused of facilitating sanctions circumvention. The package was adopted on April 23rd, making the first time Kyrgyzstan has been officially designated as a jurisdiction with a high risk of sanctions evasion. Among those affected are two banks, Kiramet Bank and Capital Bank of Central Asia, which will face restrictions on access to European capital markets and payment systems starting mid-May. Bishkek registered company Tengri Coin, which operates the Mir crypto exchange, has also been added to the list. EU officials believe it may be linked to transactions involving a stablecoin associated with Russia's Pромsvязьbank, potentially enabling the bypassing of financial restrictions. Another set of measures targets export controls. Kyrgyzstan has been added to a list of countries considered high risk for the re-export of certain technologies, including metalworking machinery and telecommunications equipment. And according to the European Commission, imports of these goods from EU to Kyrgyzstan surged by nearly 800% in 2025 compared to pre-war levels, while their exports to Russia increased by around 1,200%. Following consultations with Kyrgyz authorities, European experts concluded that existing control mechanisms were insufficient, reinforcing Brussels' decision to tighten oversight and expand restrictions. Farisa Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
A quiet vote inside the church, but the stakes could not be louder. The Georgian Orthodox Church has taken its first step toward choosing a new patriarch, the figure who will not only lead the faithful, but shape the country's moral and at times political direction. 3 names are already now in the race. But behind the numbers, there's tension, calculation, and a fragile balance of power. Our Nini Nikolashvili has more.
The Holy Synod of the Georgian Orthodox Church has selected 3 candidates for the Patriarchate following a secret ballot attended by 38 out of 39 members. Metropolitan Shio Mudri emerged as the frontrunner with 20 votes, exactly the minimum needed to win in the next stage. His rivals Metropolitan Yobak Yashvili and Metropolitan Grigoli Berbichashvili received 7 votes each. At first glance, it looks like a strong lead, but the reality is far more delicate. 20 votes is not a comfortable margin. It is the narrowest possible majority. Nearly half of the Synod did not support Shio, meaning that his position remains vulnerable ahead of the expanded assembly, where again 39 voters will decide. Losing even 1 vote could cost him the Patriarchate. The vote also followed internal friction. Disagreements over candidate eligibility led to some figures being excluded, while debates inside the Synod revealed divisions that were later formally closed without full consensus. This election comes after the death of Ilya II, a towering figure who led the church for decades and became the spiritual father of the nation, with influence reaching deep into public and political life. For many, his legacy still defines the church. Shio, who worked closely alongside Ilya II for years, appears to benefit from that legacy. His support reflects not only his own position, but also continuity with the previous patriarch. But continuity does not guarantee unity. If elected, the next patriarch will inherit not a consolidated church, but one where influence is shared, alliances matter, and authority may need to be rebuilt step by step and vote by vote. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
All right, after the break, we'll discuss Azerbaijan's evolving diplomatic strategy, including high-level engagement with Armenia and rising tensions with the European Parliament. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Against the backdrop of evolving regional dynamics, a delegation led by Shahin Mustafayev has engaged with Armenia, signaling a measured continuation of bilateral dialogue. Concurrently, Baku is considering a formal cessation of engagement with the European Parliament, evoking concerns over institutional impartiality following its recent resolution on Armenia. To help us unpack the development, we're joined by Rustam Tagizadeh, political analyst, joining us from Baku, Azerbaijan. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Great pleasure for me.
Now, Azerbaijan is talking directly with Armenia while cutting ties with the European Parliament. Is Baku trying to separate these two issues, or is it a total shift in how it deals with the West?
Okay, it is a great question, and it is only contradictory if you assume Azerbaijan has a foreign policy manual. It doesn't. With Armenia, Baku is playing a cooperative game on one board: peace, treaty, trade. With the European Parliament, it is playing a competitive game on a different board: dignity and the right not to be lectured. I think that these are non-entangled tracks. They do not affect each other because Baku has deliberately decoupled them. You can shake hands with Yerevan while telling Brussels, your resolution is unacceptable. That's not a contradiction. That's maturity. And I think that Azerbaijan will engage where there is a respect and withdraw where there is a bias. Moreover, the dual-track approach sends a clear message to all external actors. Azerbaijan evaluates each relationship on its own merits.
Now, Baku calls the recent European Parliament resolution as unfounded. What specific parts of these documents cause such a sharp reaction? And where is the line between fair critic and institutional bias?
Okay, first, language that frames Azerbaijan as an aggressor without mentioning the decades of occupation Azerbaijan subjected Azerbaijani territories. That's not critic, that's historical amnesia. Second, the demands for democratic relations in Armenia only as if only on-site needs fixing. What about democratic resilience in a country that has suffered war, displacement and mine contamination? Third, calls for sanctions for restrictions on Azerbaijan while the same institution continues to import energy from other conflict zones without similar security. I think that the line between political critic and institutional bias is crossed when asymmetric becomes systematic. The European Parliament has passed over a dozen resolutions critical of Azerbaijan. How many has it passed critical of Armenia's constitutional claims? And in my opinion, worse still, these resolutions often cite non-governmental sources with proven records of bias against Azerbaijan, treating their claims as a factual.
Now, finally, Azerbaijan usually balances relation between the EU, Russia, and its neighbors. If it walks away from the European Parliament, does it lose influence or does it gain power in other negotiations?
Excellent question. De facto suspension is a mood. Formal sovereignty is a fact, and a diplomacy facts matter. A formal break would do three things. First, legal clarity. Azerbaijan officials would no longer be expected to meet parliament delegations, attend its hearings, or respond to its writing questions. Second, signal amplification. Right now, the message we are unhappy. After a formal break, the message is you have crossed a line. That travels louder to Brussels, to member states, and to other institutions. Third, precedent settings. Other countries watching this will not. The European Parliament can be held accountable for it. Yes, words have consequences.
All right, thank you very much.
Formal. Okay.
All right, thank you very much for sharing your time and insight with us. All right, that's the news for this hour. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned to A News.